Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about civil war, and I'm speaking of the Western world here, and in places such as the United States. Is civil war even possible? And if it is, what form or structure might it take? So this is a bit of an exploration into that and into that subject and topic generally. So if we look at civil war certainly from a historical perspective, it's been about capture of territory and subjugation of that territory, and through that subjugation, expulsion of the other side. So you capture the piece of ground, the piece of dirt, you kick the other guys off it, you're in control, you've won. Now, whether it's ideological or for whatever the reason, that's the outcome, that's the intention or purpose or ultimate goal, if you like, of a civil war. And you could say that's the case if the English Civil War in the mid 1600s, the American Civil War in the 1860s, or probably any civil war, Chinese Civil War, and so on. Now, when one side is like say in the English Civil War, the difference wasn't necessarily ideological. You've got sort of the royalists and the parliamentary armies. Now, the dispute is who has the power and who has the final decision on matters of state and governmental policy, making laws, and so on. The king says, well, the king has, the sovereign, the monarch has the final word. Parliament can raise money and give advice and do things like that, but really it's an advisory body and a money-raising body, so it doesn't have final decision, the final word powers. The Parliament of the day, guys like Oliver Cromwell and so on, they disagreed. They said no, Parliament must, because Parliament represents the people in as much as they're voted in, even though not everyone had the vote, of course, but they represent the people, and therefore they should have the final say. Now, you wouldn't think that was enough to go to war over, but there was another factor that came in, that the king had what was seen as substantial Catholic sympathies, and the Protestant movement, being relatively new, was a little sort of jumpy about that. So would the king use Catholic armies to come in and kill off the Protestants and persecute them and so on? So there's a couple of strands to this, and some other sort of more minor disputes in terms of raising taxation and things like that. So really it was a struggle over land. And once you controlled the land, you controlled who could be on the land and the views that they would hold, and whether or not they were royalists or parliamentarians. And so that was and you could say that's the case of really most civil wars. But say in the case of the Russian Civil War, that spawned the Bolshevik followed on from the Bolshevik Revolution, is that whenever ideology is the imposed government, as the case it was, say, in 1949 in China, or in following 1917 in Russia, or the Soviet Union as it was, when it's an ideological imposition, then the civil war, in fact, never ends, because the civil war has to be in a permanent state of revolution to control the minds of the citizenry, and in order to justify themselves and their brutality, and to legitimize them, they legitimize that imposed ideological government, which is not with the consent of the people by definition. Then they have to assert that there's enemies and all manner of miscreants in the midst of the population. So they have to go after the enemy within, and they have to go after these enemies and use high-handed tactics and arbitrary tactics, and suspend the rule of law in effect, and arbitrary arrest, arbitrary detention, arbitrary murder by the state, because they've got a higher ideological purpose which cannot be codified in law, that cannot be effectively explained as something that you feel, that you know to be true, like a teenager's first love. You just know things to be true. Can you describe it or no? Well, no. And it's the same with ideological governments. So the idea of continued or endless civil war through revolution is and imposed ideological thought. So the civil war goes on forever, and you saw this to a large extent, say in the George Orwell's 1984 novel, how the ideological government was allegedly permanently at war with the forces of evil, which justified its heavy-handed, arbitrary tactics and use of brutality and so on to maintain power and to keep the crowds in order. Given that the consent of the public is never sought or asked for, it's demanded under threat. So that's the difference between ideological civil war and practical capture territory, get rid of the other guy's civil war. So there's a difference there. But also with ideological government, the civil war never ends. So that's it. But the ideological civil war is a little bit different. The territory isn't in itself the issue, as it was, say, in the American Civil War, the English Civil War, or indeed others. But if you look at, say, the French Revolution, the issue again wasn't really territory. It was terrorizing the public because there was an imposed ideology. Well, it was better than whatever we've had before, equality and fraternity and everything. It's better than whatever we've had before. So you should damn well know what's good for you. And if you don't like what we're doing, we will kill you, and do so arbitrarily. And you had these crazy things in the French Revolution, like the Committee for Public Safety, where they could just arbitrarily accuse someone of anything and try them in some bullshit kangaroo court and then murder them. And this was all fine in the interests of protecting the public. And you see this again in ideological governments, that Soviet Union, Pol Pot in Cambodia, North Korea, China, and the list goes on. So what form will civil war take? Well, it's not about capturing territory. Let's say there was a civil war in the United States. I think the United States is actually in a civil war, but it's a new form of civil war that doesn't involve massed armies and people with cannons and guns and flag waving. It doesn't involve that, charging down the enemy and so on. It's not that. The civil war is, I think it breaks into a few categories. Who gets to count the votes? That's in any election. And if the vote counting is controlled, then every election is a sham and you always get the outcome that you want. So whoever controls the vote counting, and there's a struggle over that at the moment, I think that's a component or category of civil war because it's being fought over now. And sure, it's through the courts and there's this and that and back and forth. But if you look at the increasingly arbitrary outside of the extra constitutional behaviour of the globalists and the Democrats, then they're clearly indicating their contempt for the law. We're not going to let you vote. We're going to rig the votes. We're going to do this, but we do it to protect democracy. I mean, yeah, sure you do, you fucking morons. So I think the vote counting is one. The other one, the next one, and just as critical, is particularly given that globalization is an ideological government, it will never ever get the consent of the people. It's imposed, therefore it must be terror tactics must be used to impose it. Accusing anybody that protests anything as being an insurrectionist and throwing them in prison for 20 years, that type of stuff. Hugely corrupting the judicial process. So for the first thing is who gets to count the votes. The next thing is the information control. You have to have, as every totalitarian government does, you have to have total information control. You cannot share the information space with any alternative point of view or even any questions. You must have total control. Hence the way they're going after Elon Musk at the moment, and the way they go chasing after anybody who questions or opposes the globalization project, of which mass migration and so on are central components. So So that's the next thing: control of the information machine, information systems, and the whole process of information delivery. That's the next Civil War battleground. And you can say, in American Civil War terms, that who gets to count the votes is the Antietam, the Battle of Antietam. Who gets to control the information flow machine is Gettysburg, and so these are key critical battlegrounds, and if we'll win in any of those is a decisive win for this Civil War. I think the next one is who gets to appoint the judges, and that's also a battleground that's fought over. Remember that the bitter battles that were fought over appointing judges to Supreme Court. The globalists knew that they were going to rig the 2020 election. But they didn't want a situation, and it was a risk to their power, of a Supreme Court that had didn't have globalist flunkies and stooges appointed to it. I mean, this is the effect of. We can see the infected nature of courts. That Colorado Supreme Court that voted to take Trump off the ballot on the citing insurrection and so on. Trump's never been convicted of any insurrection, so it's only activists screaming. But purely on the basis of ideology, we just don't like this guy. He's a threat to our power. They take him off the ballot and claim they're protecting democracy. Oh, fuck! And that's the insanity of our time. So I think those are the main battlegrounds. Whoever wins those battlegrounds has won the Civil War, in as much as they then have the power to arbitrarily impose whatever they want on the populace. So territory isn't the issue. Now you can have wild cards coming out of left field that may disrupt that, but if you control all those things, it means you can achieve any electoral outcome you want whenever you want, in whatever direction you want it to be. You control the counting process of any vote of any description, state, federal, local, presidential, anything. You control it all, and globalists haven't quite got full control, but they're close to it, particularly with the positions that really matter. That give them the power they need to do what once you get the presidential, once you can get your president elected by imaginative vote counting, then you can appoint the attorney general, you can appoint the judges, you can there's a shitload of things you can do that then give you flow-on power from that, such as rigging the courts and appointing judges that'll do what the globalist ideology requires. So I see those as that's the Civil War, and I see that the globalists have pretty much won already. They're close to it now. It's not a complete and total victory. There are still there's still Elon Musk there. There's Tucker Carlson with his program. There's Donald Trump might win the election and so on. But they've pretty much got it all sewn up. They can appoint whoever they want to numerous governments around the world. Super pro-globalists are appointed to all the positions in English government now, British government, Irish government, Scottish. There's super pro-globalists all over the place. Germany, they got the outcome they want in Poland even now. So there's very, very few places left where an anti-globalist counterattack can be launched from. The globalists are close now to controlling everything. So I think we're in a civil war, and I think that is the Civil War. And it's not going to be bayonet charges and all this sort of crap. This is the thing. And when you control all this thing, you control all the information, you control the elections, you control the entire legal apparatus, corrupted as hell, but control it nonetheless. Then you can do pretty much whatever you want and have a repressive state, which I think we already have to a large extent. Look at anyone that complains about or questions mass migration. They're viciously attacked from all sides, and you lose your job. Your banks won't deal with you, so you can't have a bank account. The list goes on. So that's the Civil War. That's the equivalent of an ideological death rather than physically being shot up on the battlefield. So I think we're in civil war currently, and I think those are the battlegrounds. But I'd be interested to see your comments below. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.